Okay, hi. So today I'm going to be tier ranking all of the classics that I read in the year 2024. This hasn't been a big reading year for me, so I read 13 classics this year, which made up 20% of my rating, which is actually quite high. So I thought it would be fun because I haven't been doing wrap-ups to kind of rank all the books that I read. I'm also very opposed to ranking books and comparing them, so it's a fun challenge for me. A lot of what I read in my classics for this year were British or classics from the UK, Victorian classics, and I would like to broaden that a little bit. So for next year, I have a kind of reading challenge that I will be making a video about in the coming month, maybe. Because I'm currently researching for what I want to do. Classics can be a challenging thing to talk about because there's a lot of isms, racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, lots of things that arise in them. And I think that can be challenging for reading them, and it can sometimes be challenging to talk about them because in some senses you have to make peace with the fact that they're there, and everyone has a different line. And so I think that when I go through my tier rankings, you're going to be able to kind of parse out partially where my line falls in what I'm willing to see in a classic and what I'm willing to not see, because it's very different than if these types of things came up in a modern text. So, I was going to put a computer in my lap, but there's actually a cat in it now, so I'm going to try to figure this out. Okay, so we'll go through my list, hopefully. Yeah. We'll go through my list. Hopefully it's recording. So I'll start at the bottom. My lowest, these are not equivalent of 1 to 5 star. I don't think I felt that any of these were the worst book I ever read, and any of these were the best book I ever read. So, but I do want to put something in each category. So just keep that in mind. My high and low isn't in the meta sense, my personal high and low. So the lowest is, it's going to be a no for me. It just doesn't work. The author doesn't work. Not interested in pursuing anything more with them. That's that. Next level up, I'm conflicted. There might be things that I liked. There might be things that I didn't like, but overall, I just didn't really enjoy the reading experience for whatever reason. Next one, it's a book and I read it. That's all there is. I didn't have many more deep thoughts. Next one up, I'm into it. I liked it. Maybe I'm not going to pursue looking into that author's backlist, but I was there for the ride. And then top one, time for a deep dive. Again, this doesn't mean that this was my favorite book of all time, or that I absolutely loved it to pieces, but it means that there's something about that author's writing, their themes, their style, something that I'm I want to now look into more of their books. So I'm starting with what I read in January and moving up. So starting off with, what is this? Yeah, this is Jane Eyre. So this is what kind of started me off on actually reading Victorians this year, since that's a lot of this list. And okay, I have some parts of this book that I'm conflicted on. So first off, what I liked. Love the writing. I found it, I love her sentence structure. I love her humor. And I really enjoy that there is a plot. Something I am learning with the Brontes is that my favorite part is generally the first part of the book, and then as it goes on, I don't necessarily love it as much. So I don't love how this book ended. There was a twist in it that I really enjoyed, where I was like, what just happened? I liked the coming of age part. I didn't like the kind of weird racism around one of the characters and the racist trope that was used. People kind of say you should, if you want to kind of dive deep into that character, to read Wide Sargasso Sea. which is like not a retelling, but like a prequel telling by a different author that is supposed to be a dive into that one character's backstory. But I'm still going to give it time for a deep dive. This is kind of what launched me into reading more classics this year, and this is also like what made me interested in the Brontes. So for that, it goes into time for a deep dive. The next one I read was Northanger Abbey. So this is my second Jane Austen, and my first one was Emma. I have not read Pride and Prejudice. There's reasons. She has such a small backlist that I kind of want to get her less popular books out of the way before not that Emma isn't, because Emma's probably one of her second most popular books. I made a whole like BookTube's definitive guide to Jane Austen, and like how people tier ranked them and like compared and like made like an official list. I'll link it. It's fun. So Northanger Abbey, though, okay, this is another one where I liked the beginning and then it started to taper off for me. So I really love the writing in this one. I love the humor. I like the sarcasm. When they're in town and before they make it to like Northanger Abbey, before they actually make it to the Abbey, when they're in town, that was the part I enjoyed most. It was a short read, but I also felt like it was, it went on for too long. Like, it kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, Jane Austen, like, I get it. You don't need to keep hitting me in the face with this. Also, though, there's like a lot of references to other literary works that I have no knowledge of. So there's certain things in this that kind of could have gone over my head. But I liked the assignment, like I liked the satirical conversation on class. I liked the thematic content of the read. So for that, I'm putting it in, I'm into it. Next, we have the picture of Dorian Gray. So the portrait, the picture. I think it's the picture. Okay, this is a reread, kind of. I read it in high school, and I don't know if really count those as rereads because, like, so much went over my head when I was in high school reading this. Rereading this, I was like, wow, this is, like, pretty clearly gay. It's not even undertones, and, like, I didn't even pick up on that as a teenager. That was interesting on reread to say, like, yeah, there's a reason that I don't think that only having classics read in the classroom is a good idea. But that's like for another time. That's like a whole rant I have. The picture of Dorian Gray is so iconic in pop culture because it's conceptually really interesting. The idea of a man changing and the ugliness of his character only coming across in a portrait of him where he retains his beauty. I think it's like it's always very timely because the idea of like youth and this like quest for youth, we're living in a world right now of like where access to things that are supposed to make you more youthful, i.e. Botox, fillers and stuff, is like in the hands of everyday people. And there's a conversation around vanity that feels poignant right now, though I think that you can say that for probably all generations in time. But as far as the book itself goes, the reading experience for me was very boring. It was short, but there were just some kind of chapters that like just went down rabbit holes about like the song he's listening to or the book that he's reading or something that's happening that I found very boring. I really enjoyed the dialogue portions. I enjoyed the plot portions. But when it came to a lot of the book, I would find myself like nodding, like just not paying attention anymore as I was reading it and having to like go back and reread. So for that, I'm putting it in I'm conflicted because like from the context of what the book was doing, I enjoy it. And looking back on it and reminiscing on the book, I enjoy it. But the actual reading experience itself, I didn't enjoy, and I wouldn't want to do another reread of it. Next one of the two American classics I read, this is Passing by Nella Larsen. So Passing takes place in the 1920s or 30s in Chicago. And Chicago, right? Am I tripping? No, I think it's Chicago. It's much more of a plot-focused, relationship-focused book than I really thought it would be. It was like there was a lot of tension in it. It's about a woman who can pass for white, and she does do so when she's in public, but she doesn't pass in her community. She is Black, and she has a Black family, and she is a part of the Black community. And she runs into this woman who also is passing, but chose to live her life like that, and is now like pulling herself, like has a white husband who doesn't know she's Black, and now is like trying to re-ingratiate herself into the Black community. It's a wealthy 20s, 30s Black community. I've never read a book from that time period with like of that class and race and like the intersection of those two things. So I enjoyed it from that perspective. It was really short, and I thought it was a lot more like punchy and like atmospheric and like than I thought it would be. And I enjoyed the kind of like open style ending. So I would say I'm into it. Like, I wouldn't necessarily specifically look for Nella Larsen books, but if I saw someone talk about a different Nella Larsen book and it sounded good, I would pick it up. But I'm going to put it in front of Northanger Abbey. I liked it more. Yeah. Okay. The Curious Sofa. I just picked this up, and I was in a used bookstore. My friend saw it. She opened it up. We literally just read it together. It's a picture book from the 50s. This one actually might be American too. I don't know. It's a picture book from the 50s, and it's just a bunch of people going between places and having sex in different places. And like, that's literally it. So it's a book, and I read it, you know? Okay, next one. My other American classic, Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is another reread for me. A reread from high school, kind of same situation. I still found the writing to be really dense. So this one follows a woman, and you kind of get this frame story of like her coming back, and then you go back in time and you see her from like a teenager through like different years of her life, and her relationship to men. And I read this with Kristen at Enter the Book, and the reading experience was really fun for that. We read a few chapters a day, and it bespoke like really good conversation. So I thought it was a great book for a buddy read. And I enjoyed it at the time. The writing is a little dense for me. Like, even as an adult, that I would say I read a lot of books. I have a good grip of the English language. There are some sections where I was like, whoa, this writing is a lot. So personally, writing style-wise, it's not really my favorite. I have no idea how I read this as a high schooler. There was this, we read it in this class where like my teacher would like have us read chapters, and then we would just sit and talk about them for like an hour or two in class, and that was like basically the whole course. And there's this part where she's like sitting under a tree, and he was like trying to tell us that she was like having an orgasm, and like all of us were like 16 or 17. We're like, what? And I came into this book knowing that conversation happened, read it, and was like, I still do not read this scene like that. Like, I don't. Anyway, side note. Okay, so it's kind of an interesting one because I enjoyed it at the time, but I don't really like remember the read super well, and I her writing style is definitely not for me. I did like the thematic content of the book, but she's very metaphoric, and her sentence structure kind of weaves itself in and out. It's very reminiscent to me of, or I should say this should say the opposite of, Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison, I also have a really hard time with her writing style. So I think it's going to be, now it's a book and I read it, but I respect it. So yeah, definitely going in front of the Curious Sofa. I respect, yeah, that feels right. Okay. Tenant of Wildfell Hall. So I was going through all the Brontes. Tenant of Wildfell Hall is kind of a book that's in like 3 parts. There's like the part 1 where you're from like the male protagonist perspective, and this woman becomes the tenant of Wildfell Hall, and he kind of becomes obsessed with her because she's kind of aloof and people don't know much about her, but he like starts to like learn her story and stuff like that. And he as a character is like all right, but like there's like a mysterious element in that time. And then the second part is like her diary, where you're learning about her, and you get her whole backstory. And like I was thinking that it was going to be like more broken up, but it's like you're deep diving into that diary without much of him reminiscing or like providing commentary on what he's reading. So maybe it does happen sometimes. I don't remember. And then there's like the resolution in the end. I really liked the first part. It took me a while, but I really enjoyed the second part. And then the third part was like, it's okay. But yeah, overall, I really liked the writing. I really liked the themes and like the kind of conversation around women's rights and like female autonomy and like the idea of a male character and like how he perceives women. Because I think a lot of the men in this I've seen as like critique of, okay, I have no idea where it cut me off. I think a lot of men in this book fall kind of flat, but I don't think the book was as much about the men, so that doesn't really bother me as much. So I'm putting it in time for a deep dive, even though there's not much to dive. Actually, did she write any other books? One of them wrote 1 and one of them wrote 2. I'm not sure. But did I like it better than Jane Eyre? I liked the ending better. It wasn't as fun. I think I might like it better than Jane Eyre. Okay, why aren't you working? There we go. Yeah. Okay, so the next one is Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. This is like clearly a very popular novel that's been adapted many times, so I don't think I need to talk much about plot, but I also don't need to talk much about it because it's a book and I read it. It was fine. I don't have much more to say. Okay, The Island of Dr. Moreau. This is H.G. Wells, and this is H.G. Wells writes sci-fi. I have attempted War of the Worlds, and I DNF'd it because I was bored. And this is a book about a man who's like on a ship, can no longer be on the ship. So he ends up on this island with some other character he met on the ship, and there's a doctor there, and they are experimenting, doing vivisection, and like it takes a while for like your protagonist to find out what's going on. So it's like an eerie read as he like tries to figure out what's going on and what these things are that he's seeing on the island. And overall, I wasn't a fan. So for a few reasons, there's plot and then there's action, and the action I found pretty boring. Like anytime H.G. Wells writes an action scene, because the War of the World begins with a lot of action, he kind of just like puts me to sleep with it, which is like impressive in itself. So I didn't really love that. What I did love, though, is kind of from a meta perspective. So it doesn't have much to do with H.G. Wells, but I like the concept of reading sci-fi from different times and cultures, because sci-fi is like very timely. It's timely to like the technology of the time and like the progress of technology. It's timely to the concerns of people from a cultural perspective in that time and place. And so reading this in terms of like the meta conversation around what people feared, what people thought the future was going to look like, I found really fascinating. But that has less to do with the book itself and more to do with my interest in like understanding people. And then there's like I just could not overlook the and this gets maybe a little spoilery, but the vivisection of like cutting up animals and trying to make them more human, and the knowing the conversation around Darwinism at the time, and like the way that evolution was used as like a mechanism for racism, and then the like ways in which these like humanoid characters were described and like how they interacted, and the ways in which people spoke of white people, white cultures spoke of non-white cultures and people in this time, it just felt so icky. It was really hard to read, and like I just couldn't overlook it. So it's just gonna be a no for me, and honestly, H.G. Wells is just a no for me. But moving on to The Princess and the Goblin, which was me trying to find fantasy books from the Victorian time. And this is like fairy tale bridging itself in more into fantasy, where there's this princess of this place, and this is definitely like written for kids. She's not supposed to be allowed out at night because there are goblins that live around, and the goblins can like, I don't know, take her, eat her, who knows what they're gonna do. But she doesn't know this. They all keep this hidden for her. And then one day she accidentally is out late with her like caretaker, and this miner finds her and like helps her home, or helps them home. And this book really should be called The Princess and the Miner, which I think the sequel is called that, so it's a little funny because like there isn't really the princess and the goblin as like interacting characters. Like I thought that was going to happen based off of the name of the book. But overall, it was fun. Like for like a prototypical fantasy of like the idea of like these like fantastic fairy tales you tell to kids, kind of coming into like modernizing like away from the oral tradition into a text. I thought it was interesting. It's like very like superficial, and it wasn't having really, it was written for kids and wasn't intended to have like very heavy thematic content or anything. So like I don't know where to put this because I enjoyed it, but like it was pretty like superficial. Maybe I'll put it at the bottom of I'm into it, because it's like, it kind of feels like it's a book and I read it, but I enjoyed it more than that, I think. Okay. Next one is Carmilla. This is pre-Dracula vampires, and it follows a teenage girl, and she has this other girl happen to come to her estate, and it's their relationship. But weird things are happening, and weird things have happened to other people. And like, this girl what she seems? And if you know what this is about, because everyone knows this is a vampire novel, then you can just guess. From the meta conversation of like where vampires originate from in culture and like kind of like how they were, their powers and stuff like that, and like what made a vampire, I found this interesting. I enjoyed the plot more. I enjoyed like the kind of like the stuffy, like kind of, it's not a super claustrophobic book, but it's like creepy at times. But it is a slow build. Like, it's not just like you come out the door and you're like, this book is about vampires. It's like a horror novel that kind of like, what is the big bad? But you kind of already know what it's going to be because this is known as a vampire classic. But I enjoyed it. I was into it. And I think I'm going to put it at the top of I'm into it. Like, I would say I could do a deep dive, but like this book didn't necessarily make me want to deep dive into the author themselves. Though I was like kind of curious about the author because it was a male Irish author in the Victorian time, and he was writing a pretty like queer-coded relationship, which kind of like intrigued me, but it didn't make me want to read his whole backlist. But now that, you know what, now that I'm having this conversation, maybe it is a deep dive. Maybe I am curious, and it makes me want to pursue more of his books. Okay, Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights. You love it or you hate it. But I'm somewhere in the middle. So, like the other books by the Brontes, I liked the beginning more than I liked the end. This book is so fucking dramatic. Every character is so dramatic. None of them are really good. None of them are really redeemable. And I don't mind that. But what I don't really like is like the redeemable for no reason. Like, it didn't feel fleshed out why these people behaved and acted the way they did. This book too, there's a lot of death in it, and it's interesting because like as I'm reading these Victorian classics and like there's a lot of dying in them, they're like unknown strange illnesses, and the relationship to like why people died in that historic setting to why people die now is like, at least in the US, is like kind of interesting because generally speaking, you know why someone died and what they're ailing from, but a lot of the time there's just like kind of this mysterious air of like, oh, well, they're just going downhill and they just need to rest, and I'm like, what are they dying of? But that's kind of a total side quest on this book. You know, what makes me, I think, the most conflicted about this book, because it made you feel, and I like that it made you feel, but Heathcliff as a character, I struggled with, because he was an adopted child, and he's described as a gypsy, and in the historic context, I'm not quite sure what they're trying to say with that. Like, I know it's like not by today's standard a term you should be using, but like in the historic context, they kind of mean like does that mean that they're not white? Were they just using it in the general context or in a general sense? Or so, and he's always described as dark. So I'm guessing that to mean he's like not presented as a white character. And he is by far the worst character in the book, and people are constantly talking about like his evil nature. And like, I want to believe that Emily Bronte was having a nuanced conversation about race and the way people see different people and like the innate way they believe someone's going to be based off of preconceived notions. But I also feel like I'm giving her a lot of credit. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm very conflicted by this book. Like, it also didn't have the thematic content that I loved with the other Bronte sisters. So I think it's definitely going, and I'm conflicted, in front of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Yeah, that's feeling right. Now, Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. This I just finished last night. Excuse me. I did it as a buddy read with Art at, what's his channel name? The Bookshelf Odyssey. I'll link him in the description. And Daryl, who I do not believe has a channel, and he's currently still reading it. This is a big book, and this is my first Dickens book. So I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, it's like 900 pages. Character work, really enjoyed. Although some of it left some things to be desired. The ability to weave a story, really good. A character would pop up in the beginning, and I would kind of think them inconsequential, and then they, like, hundreds of pages later, they show back up, and they're consequential, and they're connected to other people. The characterization, by that I more mean like the differences between characters. Like, every character felt very distinct from other ones. It makes me want to read more Dickens. He also has a lot of themes around money and wealth, and like there is some conversation around advocating for women's rights and women's right to vote and women's autonomy, relationships between parents and children, and like the gendered conversation in that. There's a lot to kind of dive into. Also, just like thinking of it in like the context of this coming out like a few chapters at a time over the course of a few years, and him not being able to go back and change things and edit as he went because he already put it in stone, but like changing character motivations as he got the feedback, I find really interesting from like a more meta conversation. I didn't love the ending though. And that's kind of a theme, which is really interesting because usually I'm not a stickler for endings. Like, I'm kind of like, the author did what they wanted to do, but this felt like it wrapped up. It almost felt like it was on a timeline where it wrapped up too quick. Like, we resolved everything very quickly. There was a relationship that I was rooting for, and then when it happened, it fell really flat for me because it happened too quickly. And there were characters that were attempted to be redeemed, and I would have liked to have seen that be more of the plot of the book, because they got their redemption arc in like a chapter and it didn't feel super deserved. But he's doing a lot of really cool things, and I liked his writing. So for that, I'm going to give it's going to be time for a deep dive, because I think that there are other books of his that I would like more. Like, I think that he's an author I could continuously, I liked this book, but I think it's one that I could keep reading him. Like, now I'm like, oh great, perfect. I have a huge Charles Dickens backlist that I could read. So that's my list. Anne Bronte being at the top, both those Brontes being there feels right. The Carmilla one's kind of a surprise, but like, upon looking back and reflecting, I did like it a lot. This is feeling right. Northanger Abbey, this is one where it's like, reading experience wise, like, didn't like super love it, but like I was there conceptually for it. So yeah, overall that feels appropriate, I think. So yeah, that's my tier ranking of all the classics I read in 2024. This is, like I said, an American and really like just like Great Britain, UK, kind of, and Ireland centric list. So that's going to be a little different going into 2025. I have plans, so that video will be coming out soon. But that is all I have. So until next time, happy reading.